$900,000 doesn't disappear. It moves. It sits in accounts, gets wired in tranches, shows up on bank statements with dates and reference numbers attached. So when my daughter-in-law called me on a Thursday afternoon in October, asking where the rest of my money was, I found that question almost funny. Almost, I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the last conversation I'd have with Jessica, where she still thought she had the upper hand. My name is Bob Williams. I'm 67 years old, and for 34 years I practiced commercial real estate law in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of law where you read every clause twice, because eventually somebody's handshake deal ends up on your desk as a lawsuit. I retired in the spring of 2023, the same season my son Michael came to me with a business plan and a dream. I live in Maple Ridge, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just south of downtown Tulsa, in the house Linda and I bought in 1989. Linda was my wife, a hospital administrator at St. Francis for almost 3 decades, and she passed in January of 2023 after a long illness I'm not going to spend this story describing, because that's not what this story is about. Losing her cracked something open in me, and Michael walking through my front door 2 months later, in March of 2023. With a binder full of spreadsheets and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was 12, building a treehouse felt like the first good thing to happen in our family in a long time. The binder was for a physical therapy and rehabilitation clinic. Michael is a doctor of physical therapy. He'd earned his doctorate from the University of Oklahoma's Health Sciences program and spent 6 years working under other practitioners around Tulsa, quietly hating that he didn't own any of it. He wanted to call it Ironwood Rehabilitation and Wellness, in a storefront on South Peoria Avenue in Brookside, the commercial strip along the old streetcar line, lined with coffee shops and exactly the kind of foot traffic a new clinic needs. He needed $900,000 to make it real. Build out, equipment, staffing, 18 months of operating reserve. And he was asking me. Linda and I weren't wealthy in the way people picture wealthy. We were careful. I had a law practice that did well, she had a steady hospital salary, and we lived below what we made for 3 decades. By the time I retired, between savings, investments, and Linda's life insurance, I had enough to do this for my son without putting myself in the poorhouse. I did not do it lightly, but I did it. Here's the part that matters for everything that comes after. I am a contracts attorney. I have spent my entire career telling other people that family deals without paperwork are the ones that end up in court. I almost made that exact mistake myself. Almost. Michael wanted to keep it simple between us. Dad, this is family, he told me at my kitchen table in March of 2023. We compromised. I would not take a seat on whatever business entity he formed, would not put my name on the door. But an investment of this size needed to be documented, not because I distrusted him, but because paperwork protects a relationship from misunderstanding, not the other way around. He agreed faster than I expected. Looking back, I think he agreed because he didn't think it would ever matter. I called my old friend Dave Brennan, who I'd known since our kids were in the same Cub Scout troop back in the early 90s. Dave spent 38 years as a title examiner for Tulsa County and still had contacts who could move paperwork quickly. In May of 2023, with a real estate attorney friend drafting the language, we filed a recorded security interest against the commercial lease and business assets of Ironwood Rehabilitation, a deed of trust tied to my investment, with a clause that any material misrepresentation of the business's financial condition to me, the secured party, would constitute default. Michael signed it without much fuss. Jessica signed it too, in their apartment kitchen on a Sunday evening, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the paperwork. I remember her saying, "It's just a formality, right? Dad always does paperwork," and laughing it off. Neither of them read past the first page. For a while, things were good. Michael called every Sunday evening through 2023, walking me through renovation progress, equipment orders, the slow transformation of an empty storefront into something that looked like a real clinic. He sent photos of treatment tables getting wheeled in, called me voice cracking the day the Ironwood sign went up. Those calls were some of the best evenings I had that first year without Linda. Then, in January of 2024, Jessica took over the clinic's finances. She'd worked 6 years at a Tulsa orthopedic group handling insurance claims and accounts payable, and on paper it made sense for her to manage the books while Michael focused on patient care. Michael explained it almost sheepishly. I didn't object. She was qualified. She was family. Remember that word. Qualified, it's true, and it's also exactly the kind of true that makes a person dangerous. The Sunday calls got shorter, then less frequent. By summer 2024, they'd stopped almost entirely, replaced by the occasional text and, every few weeks, a forwarded invoice with a note that said need this covered by Friday and nothing else. No how are you doing, Dad, just numbers and deadlines. I told myself this was normal. Businesses demand everything in year one. I'd read enough about overbearing fathers-in-law to know I didn't want to become one, so I let it go for over a year. Which brings me to Thursday, October the 16th, this year. I was in my kitchen in Maple Ridge a little past 2 in the afternoon when my phone rang. Jessica's name on the screen. I picked up expecting small talk, maybe an update. Instead, did you get the invoice I sent? The equipment supplier needs payment by Friday, or they're holding the next shipment. No hello. No how are you, Bob? Good. Can you confirm the transfer today? I told her I'd seen the invoice and would look into it. Then, because I'd been sitting on this question for weeks, turning it over the way you turn over a tooth with your tongue when something feels wrong, I asked her directly. Jessica, when exactly is the grand opening? I haven't heard a firm date. There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough that I noticed it. Oh. It was 6 weeks ago. Her tone stayed flat, like she was mentioning the weather. We did a soft launch. Family and close friends only. Real low-key. You know how Michael gets about pressure. 6 weeks ago. I did the math standing right there in my kitchen that put it back at the start of September. I had not received a call. Not a text. Not a single photograph of my son standing in the clinic that my entire retirement had built. I wasn't invited. Not a question. A fact. Laid on the table between us. It was just immediate family, Bob. We kept it small on purpose. A beat. Listen. I really need to know about that transfer. The bills are piling up and the vendor's threatening to pause. I told her I'd handle it. I hung up before she could say anything else, and I stood in my kitchen for a long time, looking out at the backyard. At the oak tree Linda used to call her favorite thing about the whole house. I thought about Linda and how she would have stood at that same window and told me plainly, the way she always did, Bob, something's wrong here, and you already know it. I let myself smile. Just slightly. Let me see what I can find out. That's not the end of this story. That's barely the beginning. Because I did look into it, every bit of it, and what I found over the following weeks wasn't a son who'd simply forgotten to invite his father to an opening. It was a financial picture that had been built, piece by piece, to keep me exactly where Jessica wanted me, writing checks and asking no questions. She had no idea what was sitting in a drawer in my home office, filed under ironwood. Closing documents, with her own signature on page 4. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The Friday after that call, October the 17th, I drove out to Brookside. I hadn't been to the clinic in over 3 months. Jessica had mentioned construction noise made drop-in visits disruptive, and I'd respected that the same way I'd respected every other boundary she'd quietly drawn around my own son. The drive from Maple Ridge to South Peoria Avenue takes about 15 minutes, down Riverside past the park, into Brookside's commercial corridor. I parked across the street and looked at it for a minute before getting out. Ironwood Rehabilitation and Wellness. The sign was up, navy lettering on white, understated, plants in the window, healthy, established. Not the kind you put in a week before opening. Through the glass, a reception desk, a woman typing, 2 patients in the waiting area filling out clipboards. It was open. Fully, unmistakably open. I did not go in. I stood on that sidewalk doing the kind of arithmetic that comes naturally after 34 years of reading contracts for a living, and none of it added up to anything good. I went home. That evening I called Michael, straight to voicemail after 3 rings. Saturday morning, 2 rings, then voicemail. My own son was screening my calls. I called Jessica on Monday, October the 20th. She picked up on the first ring. I want a straight answer, I told her, keeping my voice level. When did the clinic actually open, and why wasn't I told? I already told you, Bob, 6 weeks ago. Soft opening. An edge of impatience, like I was the one being unreasonable. Michael didn't want the stress of a big production. You know how he gets. I put $900,000 into that clinic, which we're incredibly grateful for. A rehearsed pause. Michael will call you this week. I promise. He didn't call that week. He didn't call the following week either. I am not a man who acts on impulse, but deliberation isn't the same as doing nothing. On October the 21st and 22nd, I sat at my dining room table with every email, wire confirmation, and document connected to Ironwood going back to March of 2023. 34 years of legal practice teaches you to keep records. I had kept all of mine. What I found was a picture that had been hiding inside its own details. The original investment was structured exactly as Dave and I had set it up. Disbursed in stages tied to milestones, secured by that recorded deed of trust. Buried in language my own hand had written, a sentence Michael had barely glanced at before signing. Any material misrepresentation regarding the financial condition or operational status of the business shall constitute default under this agreement. A soft opening hidden for 6 weeks, while the business kept requesting additional disbursements for pre-opening expenses. That was a misrepresentation. A significant one. On Thursday, October the 23rd, I met Dave Brennan for lunch at a diner on East 11th Street, a place we'd been going to since before either of us had grandchildren. I brought the original deed of trust and spread it across the table next to our coffee cups. Dave read it slower than I expected, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. When he finished, he looked up. Bob, you know what this means if she's been lying about the business's status. Tell me anyway. It means you're not just an investor anymore. The second there's a material misrepresentation on record, you've got a default trigger. You could move to enforce this. He tapped the page. Question is whether you want to. I told him I didn't know yet, not until I knew exactly how bad it was. Dave gave me the name of a forensic bookkeeper he trusted, Susan Kowalski, who'd spent 19 years untangling small business books for the county before going independent. I called her Friday, October the 24th. We met the following Monday. I handed her every bank statement, every invoice Jessica had forwarded, every wire confirmation going back 2.5 years, and asked her one question. Tell me where the money actually went. Susan looked through the first stack for maybe 10 minutes before glancing up with an expression I recognized from 34 years of watching people realize a deal was about to go sideways. Mr. Williams. She closed the first folder. Give me 2 weeks. I think you're going to want to sit down for this. I smiled when I hung up with her that day, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 3 decades reading fine print for a living, finally putting that skill to use for himself. Susan Kowalski called me on a Saturday, November the 8th, and asked if I could come to her office instead of sending things over email. That alone told me something. People don't ask you to come in person for good news. Her office was a small converted house off Lewis Avenue. Susan had 3 folders waiting, color-coded, tabbed. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I want to walk you through this in the order I found it. Susan squared the first folder. Because the order matters. The first folder was the soft opening. She'd pulled utility activation records, payroll start dates, and health department permit filings. Ironwood had its certificate of occupancy as of August the 28th. Staff had been on payroll, seeing patients, since September the 4th, the same date Jessica had named on the phone. That part hadn't been a lie. The clinic really had opened quietly on schedule. What came next was the part that wasn't sitting right with her. Susan slid a wire confirmation across the desk. Your last disbursement went out August the 29th. $110,000 requested as pre-opening operational costs. The day after the certificate of occupancy was issued. The day before staff started getting paid out of clinic revenue. I looked at the date. The clinic was already operational, and generating its own income. The same week she asked you for another $110,000 marked as a pre-opening expense. Susan tapped the page. That's not a paperwork delay. Mr. Williams' real businesses don't accidentally misclassify an entire phase of operation. That's deliberate. That single transfer authorized 3 days after Linda's birthday, sitting at my kitchen table without a second thought, because Jessica had asked, was the material misrepresentation Dave had warned me about. Documented, dated, sitting right there against a deed of trust that said exactly what happens when that occurs. But Susan wasn't finished. The second folder was thicker. It covered 11 months, January through November, built around a recurring line item, $4,200 a month, every month, paid out of clinic operating funds to an entity called CC Business Solutions LLC, categorized simply as consulting, business development. I ran the LLC registration through the Secretary of State's office. Susan turned the page toward me. Registered February of this year. Sole member is a Christopher Carter. It took me a second longer than it should have to place the name, and then it landed hard. Carter, Jessica's maiden name. Her brother. Not a question. Susan nodded. 38 years old, by the filing. No prior consulting history I could find. No licenses, no other clients, no website. What I did find is a car loan he took out in March for a truck that costs more than what most consultants charge a small clinic for an entire year. Has he ever set foot in the building, as far as you can tell? Couldn't find a single staff log, appointment note, or email with his name on it. Not one. Susan tapped the folder. If he's done a day of consulting work for that clinic, there's no paper evidence of it anywhere. I didn't know it yet, but Christopher Carter wasn't being overpaid for thin work. He wasn't doing any work at all. I'd find that out for certain a few weeks later, and it would be uglier than I expected, even after everything Susan had already shown me. $46,200, 11 months running, to Jessica's brother, for consulting nobody could find evidence of. I sat in Susan's office and did the math out loud, slowly, the way I used to make first-year associates redo billing summaries until the numbers reconciled. Susan slid the third folder across last. There's one more thing. This one I want you to look at before you say anything. It was a set of receipts and a contractor invoice, a kitchen renovation, a primary bathroom remodel, new flooring throughout. The billing address wasn't the clinic's address on South Peoria Avenue. It was Michael and Jessica's home in the Sunset Terrace neighborhood, bought 18 months earlier. $61,000 in home renovation costs, paid from the clinic's operating account between March and July, recorded in the books as facility improvements, secondary location. I sat back in my chair. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking, and the sound felt very far away. She used my money to remodel their kitchen. Not a question. That's what the paper trail shows. Susan closed the folder. I'd want a forensic accountant to formalize this for any legal proceeding, but the documentation is clean. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping, Mr. Williams. Sloppy bookkeeping doesn't reclassify a residential remodel as a second clinic location. Somebody made a deliberate decision to disguise that expense. I thanked Susan, paid her invoice, and drove home to Maple Ridge with the windows down even though it was 60 degrees outside, because I needed the air on my face to think clearly. Here's what I want you to understand about that drive home. I wasn't angry yet, not in the way you'd expect. I was building the argument in my head before I ever said a word to the other side. The way I'd done at the start of every case for 34 years. I called Dave that evening. We met the next morning, Thursday, November the 13th, in his garage workshop where he keeps a card table set up for exactly these conversations. I laid out Susan's 3 folders. He read every page in silence. Dave set the last folder down. You've got default. Clean and documented. The misrepresentation clause, the undisclosed disbursement to an unrelated party, the misclassified personal expense, any one of these triggers it on its own. All 3 together, no judge in this state calls that ambiguous. What does enforcement actually look like? Your deed of trust gives you a recorded security interest in the business assets and the leasehold. Default means you can move to take control of that interest, bring in your own oversight, restructure the ownership stake, even force a sale if it came to that. You don't need their permission, Bob. You needed it not to come to this. But it has. I sat with that. I thought about Michael at 12, building a treehouse with Linda handing him nails through the kitchen window. I thought about him at 33, calling me breathless the day the ironwood sign went up. I did not even once want to do this to my son. But I also thought about $110,000 requested the same week the clinic started generating revenue. About $46,000 to a man doing no visible work. About a kitchen renovation disguised in the books as a second clinic. I called Michael on Saturday, November the 15th. He answered on the fourth ring. Dad, he sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I'd like to come by the clinic, I told him. Not a surprise visit. Thursday the 20th in the afternoon. I'd like you and Jessica both there. A long pause. Is everything okay? I think you already know it isn't, Michael. I think you've known for a while. He didn't argue with that. Quiet, almost resigned. Okay, Dad. Thursday. I spent the days before that meeting the way I used to prepare for a closing. I expected to get contentious. Methodically, building a folder of my own. Susan's full report. The deed of trust with the default clause highlighted. The wire transfers. The LLC filing with Christopher Carter's name next to Jessica's maiden name. I arrived at Ironwood at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday, November the 20th, with that folder under my arm and a recorded legal instrument in my back pocket that neither of them had thought about in over 2 years. Michael met me at the door looking like he hadn't slept. Jessica was already in the small back office, seated, composed in the particular way people look when they've rehearsed being calm. I sat down across from both of them, set the folder on the desk, and said the only thing I'd planned to say first. I'd like us to go through this together. All of it. Jessica's eyes moved to the folder, then to me, and for just a second, less than a second. I watched the composure crack at the edges before she caught it and smoothed it back into place. She had no idea yet that the folder wasn't the only document I'd brought. The deed of trust was still in my jacket pocket, and I hadn't said a word about it. Not yet. Jessica started talking first, the way people do when they've rehearsed an opening statement. The 11 months of payments to her brother were legitimate support during a stressful launch. The home renovation was an honest misclassification, nothing more. Michael sat next to her, quiet, watching the version of events leave her mouth like he was hearing parts of it for the first time himself. I let her finish. 34 years of depositions teaches you the other side always talks themselves further out on the ledge if you let them keep walking. When she was done, I opened the folder and went through it page by page. Susan's documentation, the LC filing with Christopher's name, the contractor invoice with their Sunset Terrace address. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. The papers did the raising for me. Michael, I slid the page toward him. Did you know your wife's brother was being paid $4,200 a month out of the clinic's accounts? He looked at the page a long time before answering. I signed off on a consulting line item. I didn't know it was Chris. I didn't know it was every month. He turned to Jessica. You told me it was a marketing consultant. He was helping with marketing. But the certainty from a minute earlier had thinned out considerably. Doing what? Exactly? I asked. Susan couldn't find a single deliverable. No campaign, no website, no client list anywhere with his name on it. What was he actually doing for $46,000? Nobody answered. The silence sat in the room a long time. And the kitchen. I slid the contractor invoice toward them. This is your house, Jessica. $61,000 of my money went into your kitchen and bathroom, and it's sitting in the clinic's books, labeled as a second location that doesn't exist. That was when Jessica's composure went somewhere else entirely. Her voice sharpened, defensive, the real conversation underneath the rehearsed one. You don't understand what it's been like. Running this place, dealing with vendors, dealing with you asking about money every other week. I kept my voice level. I asked about money because it was my money. $900,000 of it. I never asked for a board seat. I never asked for my name on that door. I asked to be told the truth, and for 2.5 years you made sure that didn't happen. I reached into my jacket pocket and set the deed of trust on the desk last, the recorded county stamp visible at the bottom. This was filed in May of 2023, I told them. Both of you signed it. It's a recorded security interest in the business and the lease, with a default clause for material misrepresentation of the clinic's financial condition. The hidden soft opening, the undisclosed payments to Christopher, the misclassified renovation. Any one of these triggers that clause, all three together, isn't a misunderstanding. Jessica went still. Michael picked up the document and actually read it properly. For what I suspect was the first time since the evening he signed it without looking past page 1. "This is real?" he asked, looking up. "You actually filed this 2 years ago?" "May of 2023. Recorded at the county clerk's office. It's been real this whole time, Michael." "Dad?" His voice was quiet. "What does this mean you're going to do?" I smiled. Not the kind of smile from a man enjoying someone else's downfall. The kind from a man who'd spent 3 decades learning exactly when patience runs out and precision takes over. "I'm not interested in punishing you, Michael." I held his eyes, not hers. "I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. To you or to me. Effective immediately, under the terms of this agreement, I'm exercising my rights as the secured party. I'll be taking a controlling financial interest in Ironwood, 60%, structured through the existing security interest, with full visibility into every account and disbursement going forward. Jessica is removed from financial authority over the business entirely. You keep running the clinical side, Michael. That's yours. You earned that part." Jessica started to object. I held up a hand, still level. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a default remedy, already documented, already legal. Your accountant and my attorney can finalize the paperwork. I'd suggest you cooperate, because the alternative is a forced sale of the business assets to satisfy the note. And neither of us wants that." I looked at Christopher's LLC filing one more time. "The payments to your brother stopped today. If Susan's accountant determines those were fraudulent rather than legitimate, that's a conversation for a different kind of attorney." The room was quiet a long moment. Michael finally spoke, his voice rough. "Okay, Dad. Okay." Jessica didn't say okay. She sat very still, staring at the deed of trust, at her own signature at the bottom of page 4, and I think for the first time in 2.5 years, she finally understood the quiet father-in-law who never asked for a board seat had been the most dangerous person in this story the entire time. I left the clinic that afternoon and drove home with the radio off, because I needed the silence more than I needed noise. The restructuring took 5 weeks. Jessica's attorney pushed back twice. On minor points, Dave and my real estate attorney closed out without trouble. The paperwork had been written too well to leave room for argument. On Wednesday, November the 26th, the day before Thanksgiving, the final ownership documents were signed. I now hold 60% of Ironwood Rehabilitation and Wellness, with full financial oversight and a standing requirement that any expenditure over $5,000 requires my written approval. Christopher Carter's consulting payments stopped that same week. Susan's full forensic report put the total improperly diverted funds at just over $107,000. Whether that becomes a matter for the district attorney is still an open question. I haven't decided yet. Michael and I had Thanksgiving dinner together that year, just the two of us, at my house in Maple Ridge. Jessica didn't come. I didn't ask why. We sat at the same kitchen table where he'd first shown me that binder back in March of 2023, and ate without talking much. The way men in my family process things too big to say out loud right away. Eventually he spoke up. "I should have read it. The agreement. Properly, I mean. You should have," I agreed. "But you're going to read every document that crosses that desk from here forward. I'll make sure of it." He almost smiled. Threat or a promise? With me, I told him it's usually both. By the second week of December, the clinic was running under the new structure. Michael handling patients and staff, me reviewing the books every Thursday with Susan's help. No surprises. No disguised line items. Patient volume was up. A business runs more smoothly when the money isn't quietly bleeding sideways to people doing no visible work. I don't know yet what happens between Michael and Jessica. That's their marriage to navigate, not mine to fix. What I do know is this. I spent 34 years telling clients the contract you don't think you'll ever need is exactly the one that ends up saving you. I just never expected to need that for my own family. If you're a parent who's handed over money, time, or trust to someone you love, and a quiet voice keeps telling you something isn't adding up, that voice is not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. Document things. Ask the uncomfortable question. Read properly before you sign it, and if somebody tells you the paperwork is just a formality, that is exactly the moment to slow down. I am 67 years old. I buried my wife. I built a career reading fine print so other families wouldn't lose what mine almost lost. And when my daughter-in-law finally asked me, on a Thursday afternoon in October, whether I'd sent the money, I smiled, and I told her the truth. I already did. 2.5 years ago. You just never read what you signed. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.